For a Stage 2 Audi S4 S5 B9 intercooler upgrade for quarter mile, do you recommend bar and plates or tube and fins? Why? Um, I've talked about this before. If your only purpose is to do drag racing, then I typically would recommend bar and plate because bar and plate is a more massive assembly or construction type that relies on actual chunks of aluminum, bars and plates that just puts more metal, more aluminum into the intercooler core. So what that gives you is more thermal capacity, and so when you're launching and you're in the eighth mile, uh, that heat doesn't transfer to the air because there's still not very much airflow. But that intercooler has this reservoir of conductivity built into it because of the mass
Yeah, it doesn't transfer to the outside air. So
to the
it's
outside
pulling
air.
the heat
Yes,
out of the intake air, out of the intake, you know, charge air
yeah,
that's coming up into your motor,
and it's
and
holding it in the
puts it into the aluminum essentially. Yep.
the only way the intercooler can get rid of the heat that it takes out of the intake charge is through ambient air. And if you don't have ambient airflow because you're going 20 miles an hour, then the heat has to go somewhere. The problem becomes now you've got all this heat in your intercooler. It's in the aluminum, and now it takes longer to come out. Right? So think of thermal capacity as a reservoir. And so the water goes in, takes it can hold more water, but then it takes longer for the water to go out as well. So if you do have a bar and plate intercooler, you want to monitor your air temps. You want to typically do more cool down driving after your run. If you can spray it with water, that will help because
Fans, water.
the
Yeah.
yeah the heat will go into water is very conductive, and that heat will go into the water, and then the heat energy will be used to evaporate the water, which evaporating water uses tremendous amounts of energy. Like try boiling water, you see how much gas or electricity you have to put into that pot. Um, but yeah, the advantage of a tube and fin is that it transfers the heat more efficiently to ambient because there's less capacity. It cools down much faster. But when you're not moving, it's gonna a lot of that heat's gonna stay in your intake charge because it just has nowhere to go. The aluminum is now at capacity. It can only hold so much heat, and so the heat stays in the air and it goes into your motor.
Yep.
Um, Now I'm speaking in generalizations here. One tube and fin intercooler could possibly outperform a different
I
beer
was
player,
just going to
right?
mention that. Yeah, there's
I'm-
intercooler construction is
yeah.
tough to quantify in just A or B. There's a lot of intricacies that can go into those tubes and those fins.
And then just the size, like a tube and fin that's twice as big as a bar and plate could have just as much thermal capacity.
Mhm.
But then the point Nate just made, which is very important, is there are turbulators inside the intercooler and outside,
Yep.
and these turbulators are create surface area for the transmission or conductivity of heat from the air to the aluminum back to the ambient air. And the design of those turbulators is really important. And if you see a lot of these cheap eBay intercoolers, some of them just have, if you take a close look, the tubes, the internal flow area of the tubes is extruded aluminum, and so they kind of extrude these like you know tubes out, which the engine air flows through, and they try to extrude some fins and some ridges inside there. But the amount of surface area is a fraction amount of what you would get from proper true turbulators like what you'd see in a factory OEM core. Garrett has really good aftermarket
Garrett.
cores. Bell Engineering has good ones. Some of the best ones I've seen are from the factory. And then there's this dynamic of if you have too much, if you have too many turbulators, you reduce flow. So these eBay intercoolers flow a lot, but they just let the hot air flow right through. And then if you have an OEM intercooler, say the factory is designing an intercooler for a 200 horsepower engine, so they generate the maximum number of turbulators to flow for about 200 horsepower. So if you put a big turbo on and you raise your boost and now you're making 300 horsepower, you now have a massive flow restriction. Now you have a lot of efficiency to pull heat out, thermal efficiency, but the air just can't get through the intercooler because the turbulators are too tight. So there's a lot that goes in intercooler. I'm speaking in generalizations, but generally, if you had two intercoolers that were of the same quality, the same engineering, and the same size, what I'm saying would generally apply. Okay.
And I don't know if we touched on weight. Weight is another big thing. If we're talking quarter mile stuff, the bar and plate will be usually, I'd say, probably 50% heavier.
Yeah, probably twice as much.
Yeah. So that's
which is why it has more thermal capacity.
Right. Yeah, it's got to go somewhere. But that's another consideration as well. So there's a lot of metrics to try and balance out between them.
Mm-hmm.